Here's a question for you. What's the largest fish in the Great Lakes? Is it the walleye, the muskie? Mike,
It's the sturgeon.
you are right. The prehistoric fish can grow as long as 6 feet, that's 2 meters, and weighs as much as 90 kilograms, which is 200 pounds. Woo! Sturgeon can be found right in the Detroit River, but in the past few decades, the population has been declining. Now, the University of Windsor and the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research, GLEAR for short, is a new program to breed baby sturgeon and release them into the natural habitat. To learn more, we have Trevor Pitcher in the studio. He's a professor at the University of Windsor, GLEAR, and the director of the Freshwater Restoration and Ecology Center. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, first of all, tell us about the sturgeon. What makes them so special?
Yeah, so the sturgeon's an amazing creature. It's essentially a living fossil. It's the closest anybody comes to essentially to seeing a dinosaur live today. So that's what makes it fascinating for me. And I think the second part is that the sturgeon swimming by you today probably swam by your grandparents, almost 80 years ago, which I thought is always fascinating.
What do they look like? Obviously, they're big. I read the stats there. I'm just scrolling back up, 2 meters long, 200 pounds. Aside from being massive, how else would you identify them?
Yeah, I always think of them as kind of lonely torpedoes cruising through the Great Lakes. So they're
Oh,
really
that's a
large,
nice
but there are
image.
also small ones out there as well. So a lot of juveniles nowadays, which is a great sign for the Great Lakes health.
How big are you growing these at the university?
Yeah, so the university is really working on a program to close the environmental mismatch. That's what we're really talking about, trying to grow them in a setting that's more natural so that when they are released with some of our partners in a binational effort, that they do well when they get out there. So it's really important to us that they grow up to about maybe 8 to 12 inches and before they're released, and then they're off they go. And they're
Off
off
they
for the
go.
next 60 to 80, 100 years maybe.
Unbelievable. Now, why is there such a decline? What's causing this decline?
Yeah, the decline has sort of varied over the years. Years ago, it used to be because of over-harvesting. In the Great Lakes in the early 1900s, we took advantage of that food resource, and then eventually shipping lanes kind of ruined their spawning habitat, and then it became dams for electricity. So it's been a number of things that have kind of knocked them down. The good news is we've made huge progress to bring them back.
Can you tell us or expand on this project, what it looks like at the university and how you're going to
Yeah.
be able to bring sturgeon
Of
back?
course, yeah. And the university is one of the key players amongst all the Great Lakes players to do this reintroduction program with even our U.S. partners, where what we're doing is really trying to better understand. People have tried to bring them back through the lakes, but their success has been limited because the fish are sort of lost in the river, lost in the lake. So we're trying to naturalize the breeding kind of environment they're growing up in to try to make it more natural. So we're trying to close that environmental mismatch. And we have a team of graduate students at the University of Windsor solving problems every day on this question.
How do you do that?
Yeah, well, what they do is they're actually raising them in LaSalle, right on the Detroit River, in these in tanks where they range from, essentially no background, essentially a blank tank with nothing in it, all the way to a very enriched tank with tons of rocks and other things that are more naturalized. And then they're comparing their behaviors, their stress, and their swimming abilities to see which ones do best before we let them go in the future.
And how's it going so far?
Well, so far so good. They're about 8 months old now. We hatched them from egg, and now they're like our essentially kindergartners, and they're doing really well. Yeah, so I give
Wait
them
till
all.
they become toddlers.
Oh yes, we're also worried about those teenage years. So they're doing well so far. They all get an A+ in our books.
And what are some of the problem solving that the students have to do?
Yeah, so a lot of the problem solving really has to do with how do you test experimentally and carefully with a live animal what they prefer and what they grow the best with. And we're trying to ask them questions. I think that's really the challenging part, is the graduate students trying to ask them questions about which of these environments make you more fit for the Great Lakes when you get back there.
How are you going to track them once they're in the Great Lakes?
That's a great question. So we're lucky because we have a large number of partners we work with, and a lot of times all the fish have tags in them. So we actually end up following them for, essentially decades after the program. So they all have tags inside them that stay with them for their whole life, and we can monitor them as we recatch them, or there's satellite tags that also follow them around the lake as well.
How long are you keeping them in the tanks before you release them?
Well, this is part of a binational effort, so we'll keep them in the tanks for just under a year or so, and then we'll pass them off to our U.S. partners, and then they'll be released in different parts of the Great Lakes.
How many? Oh, my mic's not on. How many are there?
Right now, we've got 300 lake sturgeon, which is a relatively large number because there's really nowhere else you can see juvenile lake sturgeon like this. So we have a
Yeah.
large number of them sitting there ready to go, and they're just kind of growing by the day. Yeah.
Any idea what the population is right now in the Detroit River?
Yeah, the Detroit River has, we've estimated the population in a few thousand now, so probably 5,000 or 6,000, but they're certainly growing in number. And what's fascinating is that group that lives in the Detroit River kind of has unique properties. They kind of hang out there in the wintertime, then they cruise up into Lake St. Clair, or they head out to Lake Erie. So there's kind of three groups of them.
Why do they live so long? If they turned 100, and we ask people when they turn 100, how did you make it happen? What's your secret? What's their secret?
Their secret is they're essentially living fossils. They've been swimming around. Their ancestors were here when the dinosaurs were here. So these are like living descendants of dinosaurs, and they swam around. Dinosaurs would walk around them, and these guys have kept their ancient form for that long. So they live a long time, partly because they're large and they're slow growing. Their growth is incredibly incremental, so it takes years for them to get that big. It takes 25 years to even just to become sexually mature.
Wow. Now, the knowledge that you're getting out of this project, will it be transferable to other projects that would help the Great Lakes?
Absolutely. So part of the big program here is doing what we call reintroduction biology, trying to solve this problem of bringing species back to the Great Lakes that have been extirpated for a bunch of reasons. So the lessons we learn here can be easily transferable to other species and, importantly, transferred to the next generation of researchers. This is a multi-generational plan. We're part of a big team. And if we don't do that, these species won't come back naturally.